Okay, so that's piece one, geography. Piece two, demography. This is a standard demographic profile. Lots of children, fewer young adults, fewer mature adults, fewer retirees. It's a strict capital system in which credit is kind of expensive. Why is that? Well, your mature adults, people in their 40s and 50s and early 60s, these are people where the kids have gone home, hopefully, or I'm sorry, the kids have left, hopefully. Whoa. College is paid for, the house is paid for, you're saving for retirement. And so you are net contributors of capital to the system. But you're a small generation, so you're not contributing a huge amount, just a lot per person. Your younger generations, people in their 20s and their 30s, these are the consumers. They're raising kids, they're buying cars, they're buying houses, but they're new to the world. They don't have high incomes yet, but they have huge volumes of expenses. So they generate all of the growth because of their consumption, but they have to borrow in order to fund that growth. So you have a small generation providing credit to a large generation. Strict capital system, credit costs are relatively high. Here's Canada. Sometimes, around 1965, the Canadians forgot how to have kids. Now, in my younger years, I spent some quality time in Canada. I can tell you they got the basics down. You're missing something. This is an inverted demography. You've got a larger, mature generation providing credit, large volumes of credit now, for a smaller replacement generation that is doing the consuming. So this is a system where credit is cheap. And Canadian credit, on the whole, is the cheapest it has ever been in Canadian history. Here's us. We're a little inverted, kind of a chimney system, but it's not too bad. The top group there's the baby boomers. These are the folks that are entering retirement right now. They're the largest generation we've ever had as a percentage of the population. Big generation, lots of credit costs are low. The replacement generation, this is me, Gen X, there's 12 of us. One of the reasons why economic growth of the last few years has been a little subpar is there just aren't enough of us to buy the volume of goods and raise the volume of kids that we became used to in the last 15 years because of the boomers. But for us, having a huge generation providing credit and just the 12 of us consuming it, that's fantastic. I mean, I was able to refinance my house twice and get 2 cars out of it. I mean, it's great. My mortgage payment, 3% mortgage. Can you imagine that 15 years ago? Yeah, I don't think so. And then we've got these jackasses coming up down the line. This is Gen Y. They're the boomers' kids. These are the ones who are living at home. This is the second largest generation we've ever had in American history. And what we're seeing is as the boomers are moving towards retirement, credit is cheap. But as soon as they shift into retirement, just like the Canadian Gen X, or just like the Canadian boomers, they're going to take their money with them. And all of a sudden, credit costs are going to spiral because my generation, or the Canadian equivalent of me, isn't sufficiently numerous to replace the volume of credit we're about to lose. Now, we've got this Gen Y group working up through the ranks. They're a larger group. And as they get older, we're going to have something a little bit different. Now, check what we have here. This is the developed world writ large in the upper right. You can see that the rest of the developed world, Europe, Japan, has basically the Canadian problem, and that the replacement generation is considerably smaller than what came before. But in the United States, we have Gen Y. And so as Gen Y matures, and I use that term in the loosest possible way, eventually they will be able to fill the gap. And by the time we get to 2030, here's where we'll be. The United States will have a more normal demographic again. So the budget battles that we fought last year, we're going to be looking at that getting worse each and every year for the next 15 as the boomers retire and Gen X takes their place. But by the time we get to 2030, Gen X will be retiring, and Gen Y, with their larger numbers, will have kind of filled in the gaps, and we'll be back to a more normal demographic with more normal credit costs, with more normal tax revenues. But the rest of the world won't. The rest of the world will, writ large, be a giant old folks' home. And how they're going to run a modern economy without a tax base and without a workforce is going to be very interesting. For those of you who have been worried about or betting on China, take a look at their demographics. That lower line there, that one that juts out at the 20 to 25, that is the entirety of the Chinese consumption boom. They're the last children who were born before the one-child policy was adopted in force. Now, that might only be a five-year period, but that's 125 million people. This is still China. And that's real, that's big, but there's nothing coming up the pipe. Now, you may have heard that the Chinese have started to loosen one-child a little bit, but keep in mind that you don't get 20-year-olds overnight. It takes 20 years and 9 months, assuming you start right now. So if they don't start right now, here's where we are with China in 2040. China is the world's fastest aging country. And by 2019, just 5 years from now, the average American will be younger than the average Chinese. So demand in China is real, and it's temporary. Everything about the Chinese miracle is questionable from my point of view, but it's certainly going to be over by 2020. Now, I can give a whole speech on China, but that's not your guys' market, so we're going to talk about them instead. One more piece. So we've got geography, we've got demography. Let's talk about shale real quick.